reactive forms, how to use a form builder, how do we use a form array, how to work with the builders and array. Right. So next important, after understanding about the reactive forms. So one more option we need to know is about how we can manage the simple validation in reactive forms. Right. So in the Angular forms, so we learned how to configure the form builders, how to add controls, manage controls dynamically. Now, one more option in the reactive form we need to know is basically about so validating input in a reactive form, in reactive forms actually. How we can validate input in reactive forms. So technically, validations in reactive forms. The basic concept of validation is same. So, but some new points you need to understand here to deal with the validation. So let's see what they are. So how do we handle them? Actually, the reactive forms, as I already told you in two-way binding, we learned about two-way binding. Model is the single source of truth. In two-way binding, we discussed that. And in reactive forms, in a reactive form, the component class. So component class is the component class is single source. So is the single source of truth. It is the single source of truth. You can say that it is the source of truth. That means, so the point is, source of truth means it contains the information that verify what is required and what input happened. So that means we will not add validators through attributes in the template. We add validator functions directly in the form control at the component class. That means instead of adding validators through attributes in the template. So you can configure them. Technically, you can configure them in controller class. We can define them controller class. So what Angular will do is, Angular will call the validator functions. So validator functions whenever the value changes, and whenever the value changes, so it verifies that the input value is according to the validator defined, and returns boolean true or false. It returns boolean true or false. That is what actually the reactive forms is. So generally, the validation functions so can be categorized into different types actually. Validating functions are categorized into different functions. So Angular provides some built-in validator functions, and Angular provides options for creating custom validation functions also. Custom validation functions we already written. We learned how to apply them. So we have built-in validators. So Angular provides a set of built-in validator functions. So built-in validators, and also allows to configure custom functions, custom validator functions. It will allow to configure the custom validator functions. That is actually how it can allow the configuration. So it provides built-in validators, and the built-in validators are derived from so validators class are derived from validators class. So it will provide a set of validations that you can manage for your input elements inside the form. Actually, we have a lot of validators. So technically, so what are the different types of validator functions and how we can use the validator functions, configuring the validator functions and work with them. So many validator functions are present. So predefined validator functions. So all are present in these validators. So the commonly used validator functions are, so we have some commonly used validator functions, like we have min. So we have like max, we have like required, we have like required true. So we have like email, we have like min length. So we have like max length. We have pattern, and we have null validator. We have compose, so it is used for configuring same compose async. So these are some the basic functions we have actually. So these are used for creating the validations, configuring the validations. We can use these validator functions for handling the validations, especially in reactive forms, how we can manage them, right? So let's see one simple point how we can actually write the validation. How do we configure and write the validation? One more regularly in interviews, one question is asked for experienced people usually is, so the frequently asked question is, so what are synchronous and asynchronous validators? Async validators. That is question very frequently found for experienced people in interviews. So actually, Angular, due to the performance reasons, it uses only asynchronous validators. Synchronous validators are not regularly used at all. But generally in interviews, just to understand how much level of validations you know, are synchronous functions that can take control, that can take control, uh, that can take control of an element immediately, control of an element, and return either the validation errors are there or no errors are present. So technically, synchronous functions, so what they do is they will take a control instance and immediately return either the set of validators are having errors or not. Technically, it will manage that, right? So that means what synchronous validations can handle, right? Synchronous validations can handle. Synchronous are nothing but these functions that take a control instance. A control instance. Control instance is nothing but a control object. They will take a control instance and immediately they will return a set of validation errors, or they will return null. So asynchronous validation functions take control of any object, take a control instance and return. So actually it uses an observable. That means async validators are asynchronous functions. These are asynchronous functions. These are asynchronous functions that take a control instance. That means they will take an object and return a observable. Actually they return an observable. What is the purpose of observable? So and return a observable which actually emits the result later as per the situation. That means it will not return the error immediately. It will identify the error and it will keep the error, and whenever is required, it will return it. That means it will, if it immediately returns the validation error, then it is synchronous. That means as soon as you entered the control and you went to the next, it returns the error, it identifies. And asynchronous means asynchronous validators are nothing. Usually they will identify the errors but will not return them immediately. They will wait for a situation. They wait for a state, and when the situation and state are satisfying, then they will return that. For example, like form is submitted, then fire up the validations and show. So by default, actually you should know that Angular by default uses async validators. By default it uses async validators. So you can define sync validators or async validators. So technically Validators are nothing but synchronous validators means they will return the error immediately. Asynchronous means they will wait for the situation, and when the situation comes, then they will return. That is what actually they manage, how they handle it. How to configure the validators? How do we handle the validators? How to write the validations? That is one simple thing. You need to understand how and where to write the validators, configuring the validators. Whenever you are defining the controls, so we can configure and define the validators. So for example, okay, so suppose we created a form group. We created a form group, a form group, a form builder by using any approach we have designed something. So we created a reactive form and we want to define some options for that. So actually the basic syntax how you define the validators. So the general syntax how you define the validators. So we are configuring. So suppose a property like txt name is a new form control. New form control. And this form control is having a value. What value you want for that? And here you can configure an array. So that array comprises of validators. That array defines a collection of validators. So you can configure the validators. And actually validators are derived from the validator base. They are derived from the validator base. We can configure and use from the validator base. Right. So anything is simply handled. So first we need to know the process, and we need to define the validator in the input element for that. So input element. So input element will use the validator here. So we configured the validator and the input element must use the options. So validators, it can configure and use the validators. So technically, how the validators are defined and configured. So that is the basic approach we have to learn. Right. So configuring and defining the validation is simple here. Only the point is reactive advantage is in reactive forms, it is completely controller centric actually. Controller centric. That means, so based on the controller. So base means it will handle everything at the controller level. At the controller level, configuring everything at the controller level, right? It defines at the controller level. Now let's see one simple example how we can manage that. How you can configure and define. A simple option how to manage. For example, roughly I will add a new component, integrated terminal. So ng generate component reactive validation. Reactive validation. Okay, skip test. Okay, we are defining. Okay, now it is done. Okay, now let's go to the simple presentation and keep it in the startup. Yeah. So reactive validation. Fine. We kept in the startup reactive validation. Okay. Now here I will save this and let's keep in the module. Reactive validator, validation. Okay, so that is the module. Fine. Now, how do we configure a simple option here? So for the reactive approach, let's go to the reactive validation TypeScript. As we discussed, this is the single source. And we are configuring, so we are configuring the options import, and we are importing from, so the Angular core library. So from the Angular core library, so we are configuring, so the options that we are already Angular core is there. Angular forms library. Okay, okay. We will import validators. Validators is the class that configures all the validators and defines the validators. Okay, now let's go to the application here. So FRM register, so a property FRM register, and this FRM register so is of a form group type. So we defined as a form group type, and so it is a form group. So it is a form group type, and whether submitted or not, we need to configure and we need to define right form. So I'm using a form group type. So it is a form group. Okay. So this is a form group type. That means it is a form. All right. Next, we are configuring some property like submitted or not. So by default it is false. So the submitted is false. It's a Boolean option. Now we will import a form builder into the constructor. So provide FB, and we will make it as form builder. Or how to use a form builder yesterday we learned. So on the initialization, the memory, we will use this .frm register, which is a form group. So we will use this .fb form builder, and we will create a group. Yesterday we saw that we will create a group. In that group, we will define some properties. We'll configure some properties. So different types of properties we can configure. So like suppose I'm defining some name. So username, something like this. Okay. And the username is a control, And what value you want and what validators you want. So here we can define comma, we have to write validators. Validators, which validator? You have all the validator. We have required validator. We are configuring required validator for that. And similarly, so suppose we are configuring like mobile, and here empty and validators. So we are configuring the validators. This is also required. So suppose we have some email. So we are defining the value and validators dot email also required, and multiple, you can add multiple. If you want to add multiple, then you need to maintain an array here. That means if you want to add multiple validations, you need to maintain an array here. Email is required, and email will have validators.email. You have a default email validation. You can configure that. right? You can configure that. Suppose you want to define some username with min length 4 characters, then of course username. So you have to define. So with validators, so validators dot required and with validators dot min length. So min length. So min length, how many characters? Some 4. So that is the validator we define. Like this, we can configure the validations. Now, what should happen here is we need to able to access the controls from the form. We need to access all the form fields. That means first name, username, mobile, email. We need to access these form fields easily and use them. In that case, yesterday we learned we can use an accessor. I will use an accessor FRM. This accessor should able to access all the form fields. That means it will return, this accessor will return this dot FRM register dot controls. It will return all the controls. It is returning all the controls. So that you have configured, right? That means through this FRM property, so this is FRM property, and actually it is a key string type and the value is a control, That means if you access username, then it will get that username control and it will use that username control. Now we have to write some function, like we will write a function on submit. So what should happen? On submit, this dot submitted will return to true. We will set it to true. If any, because all the validation we need to control at controller level only, then what we can do is, so if this dot FRM register dot invalid, that means if it returns invalid, then we need to pop up some message and display, or we will simply put return. Return is nothing but it will return all the errors. Return will return all the errors that it is having. That means if it is invalid, it will return all the errors. If not invalid, then we will put an alert saying that registered successfully. This message we will give. That's how we configure the validators. But important, so this is not enough for the validations actually. We need to configure all the options and define all the options dynamically. We need to define, right? So for example, we need to add all of them and configure all of them. So technically what we need to do now is we need to attach this to the form. So let's go to the HTML. And here I'm just designing a simple basic div and a class container fluid and a header saying that registered user. And here we need a form, and you know that it uses a form group, and the form group is FRM register. That is the form group. Okay, on submit, so we can use submit. So ng submit is specially for submit. It has to call on submit method. So it will verify whether the submit is true or not, right? Now we will use some options here, like, so we will keep the controls. So we will have a class form group, and here we will have a label, some username. and we will have a div. So in that text box, text, we are configuring the text. And this is referring to form control name, and the form control name, it is referring to username. That is the form control name. And we are using the class as form control. Form control is the class. And here we are not displaying any messages. So we are not displaying any, we are not using any validation here. Property is not configured here. Any validation is not configured here. So, but means we are not writing any validation property there, attribute there. Here we are defining a simple div. We are writing ng if the form is submitted, that means if submitted is true. And we need to call this control, username control. We can access by using an accessor. We created an accessor FRM. Through that accessor, we can access that control. That means how we can access that control. That means FRM, that is the form. FRM is the property. In that, we have username. Username is property. If username is having errors, errors, it is an object which collects all the errors. Already we know that. Then what we will do is, so we will just put a class as text danger. That is the effect here. If it is so, and we need to identify which error it is dealing with. Then we need to put a reasonable message there. That means div. This indicates. So if it is required error, that means we will keep a span here. And here we are writing. So ng if, and if this FRM dot first username dot errors, and errors is a required error, then you will just put the message saying that username based on that we need to use. So usually how you submit, by using a submit button. That means other controls also you need to write in this way. So I will just give a div and class as form group, and here we are using a button, and this button is like register, and here we have the class as btn and btn, so primary. Okay, and let's go into this the concept here, how we define in the HTML, right? So in the CSS, I will just keep a simple form. So form, so some width as some 400 pixels like this. Okay, just this option. Yeah. So this is the form, and you can see, so that is the form that we design. And let's keep this as 300, and I will just keep this as btn block. So btn block. Okay. And important is when you are submitting that field, that means register, it says username required. So it is working fine. But observe carefully is in the template, we haven't used any validator. You observe carefully in this input form control called username. Form control called username. We are not using any required. Earlier in template driven form, we can directly write here and we can use it. So now the validations can be configured. So in the reactive form, what is advantage of that is the validators can be dynamically passed. The validations can be dynamically changed also. We can configure, we can change the validations also dynamically. So technically, the same thing I need to do for others also. That means the other fields that I have here, so that mobile, that email, all of them we need to configure with the same options, right? So yeah, technically we will go here, just create a group. So copy this group and paste this group. And this group is for mobile, and this control name is referring to so mobile, and it is FRM mobile errors. So and this is for mobile errors required, and here we defined as mobile required. And here one more control group you have to design, that is for email. And here for that email, so we are configuring with the email with multiple validations. So we are defining email, and here the email email.errors, and here email.errors. So email.required, and here it says is email required, and it should also put a span, so where it will display another message. So that is ngIf frm.email, so dot errors, and this is email error. That means we have an email error, and so invalid email. So that is how we have to define. So configure the multiple options and define them. Now let's run this and see here. That means on the submit, it should handle all the validations. So on the submit, it should get all the validations, and I am entering the username. So username required, I entered some username. So that is username required. And it is having multiple, actually. We are not giving multiple. That means I'm adding some name, right? I'm adding some option here. So 987654321. Okay. And here we are entering email. Then it says invalid email, because it should be in a proper email form. Some rahul@gmail.com. So it is invalid email whenever you write any invalid, and it is valid. So, and when I click on register, then it says registered successfully. Otherwise, the validation errors are returned there. Automatically, it will return those validation errors and configures them. And the same thing, actually, for the first name also, in our validation, we have so min length also defined, min length as false. So here I'm adding, so one more message here, span. And this is like ngIf, and that is frm.username. So that errors is a min length error. So name too short. So with this message should be displayed. That's what the validation we are expecting for that. And when I enter anything there, it says name to short, otherwise it is fine. Same what we defined for the template level, the same is working at the reactive level. This is a simple approach how we can configure the validations and define the validations at the reactive forms. So we have to use a validators combination and define. You don't need to configure validation. So for the element now, because element is borrowing the validations and handling those validations. So whenever a form control instance is created, it will get everything from the controller. So dynamically, when you are presenting a form for various occasions, you can change the validators if you are defining them inside the component. That is the intention of how we can handle validations for reactive forms, means how we can manage the validations for reactive forms. So this is one basic example for that example. So we have done everything similar, just only the point is you can have everything. All right. So you can use a combination of both of them, reactive, templates, right? You can use any. So there is no restriction that, so because there can be multiple forms in a single page itself. In that case, one form can be dynamic, another form can be a template. You can use a combination of different. So combination of different things, right? Yeah. So technically, the example for this is an example. So we have a reactive validation dot component dot ts, and there we need to add this logic. This is all the logic for reactive component ts. Right, we need to define this. Yeah. Next important is the reactive here, reactive validation dot validation dot component dot html, and in that we need to add this effect, configure that effect. Password weak or strong, even JavaScript person also can tell that. The regular expression, we use regular expression now, right? I hope if you are there continuously in our sessions, we already learned that also. So regular expression, how to deal, right? We learned about how to deal with the regular expression and validating strong password, weak password like things already we saw that. So by using the string match function, we learned about key up, key down like event binding. There already we learned all that examples. Right. So this is generally the concept of how we can use the forms, working with the forms. So this is all about the Angular forms and their validations, both template driven and reactive forms. Next, after understanding about the forms in Angular, now we are going to another very important topic, that is routing. How do we deal with routing in Angular? What actually this routing is, and what is the intention of routing? Actually, routing, technically you should know that routing is a technique introduced into web application development. It is a technique introduced into web application development, which all applications are using these days. Every web technology is using this routing technique actually. So I will show you, means generally earlier in early days of web development, we don't have this routing. So now it is very popular and very important for our applications. Actually, so in the early days means what is the problem in the early days actually is, for example, I don't know from how many years you know internet, but if you have used internet in the early days when YouTube was introduced, that means first YouTube was introduced by Google. A first shopping site like eBay was the popular shopping site. eBay and YouTube so were first introduced. So actually more than that, so many is there. Just I'm just giving an example for you. So that means in the early days of web internet, so already I told you like from 20 years, 25 years you are using internet. You know the pain of internet early days. Actually, in early days, we have to maintain a diary for website address. So in the early days, that means URLs are very strict. I don't know you have that experience or not, but in early days when internet was used, so in the early days of internet, we don't have much search engines. Google was not there at that time. Yahoo, MSN, so those were very popular at that time. And actually, we have to be very perfect in the URLs. If anything went wrong in the URL, it will simply say that not found. People have to maintain address of websites in their diaries, go to internet point and see the diary and type the address and access it. That was the situation early days. Later, when these websites came, uh, you can't remember that Ankit Gupta. If you remember that, you have seen that. That means you are more than 40, 50 years old. I hope you are just in your 20s. Ankit Gupta, you don't seem like you are more than 40 or 50. Huh? Huh. Right? Because so people with 38, 40 plus years have experienced that. And they know internet from 20, 25 years. They know about this. Right? Right? Of course, if you know that, that means from the kid days itself, you born with internet. Huh? You know internet. That's great. Right? That means in the early, the kindergartens itself, you know internet. That's great. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. People know that. So in the early days when people use the internet, they have this problem. Not only, I'm explaining the correct scenario actually. We need to write down the address and all these. One more point is uh, when YouTube came in the early days. So on YouTube, so we searched almost 15 minutes. We searched and finally we found a video. One video we found, and we were unable to bookmark that video and the URL that it returns. And after that, I want to show that video again to some other person. And later, some other day, some other computer, somewhere else, I want to show him that video. Then again, I need to search. I need to remember where I found it. So even shopping sites in the early days when they came, they have this problem. That means you searched for a product and next day you forgot where you searched. Again, you have to spend so much time in searching for the same content there in that website because millions of data is there. So this is the regular problem for users of web. To overcome this issue, so the concept introduced called routing. Routing creates user and SEO friendly URLs. What is the specialty of this routing technique is it uses not only just URLs, it uses URIs, uniform resource identifier. So that you will feel regularly now. For example, you watched a video today and just close. Next day you open, even it will suggest you from where you left the video. That's great. That means now searching for your content in a website becomes very easy. It makes more SEO friendly. Now, another point is, suppose I opened some Amazon or I opened some Make My Trip, and in that I done some searching of something and I left it, and I opened my Gmail or I opened my Facebook, immediately you can find an advertisement for them in the Gmail and Facebook. Suddenly you will find an advertisement for exactly what you have searched on Amazon. That's surprising, right? Like that means how that is happening. How Gmail and Facebook are able to display what I have searched on Amazon and Make My Trip sites on my computer. So that means now that means identifying a page is okay, but identifying something inside the page, especially we have single page application. In single page application environment, everything is in one page. Then do you know if you bookmark, what will happen? Only the page will bookmark. Not just page have to bookmark. In that page, so I have done lot of manipulations. That means lot of changes. That means on that page, almost some 300 components I changed. And later I want some component from those 300 in between somewhere. Then identifying that location and going to that location again is a challenging one for web, especially for websites. So now this problem is solved by using the concept of routing. So routing is a technique. Technically, routing is a technique introduced into web application development. The main intention is routing makes URL more SEO and user friendly. SEO friendly URLs, actually SEO friendly URL can exactly identify the user location, and prompt. It can prompt the suggestions. It can prompt the suggestions. Technically, it can prompt the suggestions. Based on the browsing history. Based on the browsing history. So that is SEO friendly URL. User friendly URL allows the user to reach any topic. So just with one click. Another important specialty is, so routing can load new contents into page without reloading the complete page, that improves the performance, that actually improves the performance. So that means, so single page applications and progressive web applications require routing. They require routing. That means user will stay on one page and gets access to everything onto the page, gets access everything onto the page. That is what actually that already I explained here. User friendly URL means it allows the user to reach any topic just with one click. That is user friendly URL. SEO friendly URL, that means it can identify what he is searching, what he is browsing, and based on the browsing history, and it can suggest him that you left here, you can continue from there and all. Right? That is what actually SEO friendly, user friendly means. Already I given that. Once see that. Right? So technically that is the concept of routing. And every technology is using routing now. So that means routing is implemented both server side and client side and Angular implements routing in client side application because Angular is client side application. Server side also routing is there. That means Node.js, like they use routing, like .NET uses routing, PHP uses routing. So we have routing techniques in every web technologies. Every technology is using these routing techniques, right? And how this routing works, the basic architecture of routing and working with the routing architecture, dealing with that architecture. Practically, we need to understand working with this routing. That we will see in tomorrow's session, right? How this works practically. In a new session, we can continue this concept, right? Tomorrow, we will continue with this. And we can design one example based on that, right? Yeah.